Hello, everyone. Good evening. Gordon Causey, as always, Candy the Wonder Pup, already hounding me for her treat. Uh, Lay down. Oh, shake it, paw. All right, come on up. There you go. All right, that's it. That's it. That's all you get. It's like she thinks I have an endless supply. And I've got a full bag of them, but I'm not giving them to her all in one shot. Thank you for watching on this Tuesday evening. We're now the 16th of July. It's just after 11:30 p.m., 11:33 according to my computer. And what to talk about tonight? Everyone is focusing in on what happened with Donald Trump. Everyone's focusing in on the ongoing Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The events are getting rehashed. If you're like me, you've watched countless videos, read countless stories about what took place on Saturday in Butler, Pennsylvania. And revelations are coming out daily about what the Secret Service knew, who was responsible for that specific rooftop. Was it the Secret Service itself? Was it local law enforcement? We're seeing videos showing spectators at the rally pointing out, saying, "There's a guy up there. He's doing an army crawl. He's got a gun." Minutes before, at least a couple minutes before the shots rang out. I have a number of people watching now. I've got 4. Live chat is on. Let me change it from top chat to live chat. I like to see all the messages. Daniel Copeman is here. Mon ami de la ville de Montréal, my friend from Montreal. And Monarchy is here as well. There are others watching. Virtue Signal Side, good evening to you. And one thing that has occurred to me is I do want to talk about the Trump assassination attempt. That's laser-like focus. Everyone in the world is focusing in on that. We now have a vice presidential nominee, a junior senator from the state of Ohio, this guy by the name of Nance. And I saw him being interviewed a couple months ago on NBC, on one of the major networks, and they're going, hitting with the usual attacks. We're seeing reactions from everyone. Bill Maher, Jack Black, and his Spinal Tap type rock band, Furious D or Tenacious D. They were touring in Australia. I have Daniel Copeman writing, they said the ROE, meaning rules of engagement, was to wait until they said to wait. They said the ROE was to wait until he fired. ROE stands for rules of engagement. During my military service, I was never in theater. I was never in an active war zone. But things would be, we would have exercises. There would be scenarios, and with every scenario, you would be given a card with your rules of engagement about when you were allowed to escalate, when you were allowed to engage in deadly fire, those types of things. But I was a radio guy. You would be, during an exercise, I would be issued a rifle. The Canadian version of the M16, the C7, and tanks. Rules of engagement stipulate under what conditions you are allowed to discharge or fire your weapon. And what Daniel Copeman is writing is that the rules of engagement was to wait until there was actual fire. They were not allowed to engage preemptively on someone. That's what he is writing. I've heard the same thing, but there's so much conflicting stuff out there. And Monarchy is writing, Mick Jagger said he loves Trudeau and got booed. Yeah, that was, he was at a concert, I think, in what used to be called the Sky Dome. Might not have been. He was at a concert venue in Toronto, and he talked about how much he liked Trudeau or something and just got rained down with boos. Virtue Signal Side writes, background Hummer. I'm not going to touch that one with a 10-foot pole. The one thing that I'm finding curious about all this is that there's little chatter. I'm not hearing any real speculation on what would have happened if this kid, Thomas Matthew Crooks, if he had succeeded. What if he had succeeded? What if Donald Trump had not just turned his head ever so slightly and you know and the instead of hitting the ear, it had blown off half his skull? What if Donald Trump had been killed? What would we be facing in today's world now if that had happened? And all I'm hearing people say when that is brought up is, I don't even want to contemplate. I don't want to imagine. I can't even begin to imagine. Words to this effect. But I think it's something worth exploring, especially if, like me, I'm leaning very heavily towards this idea that I don't think was Thomas Matthew Crooks acting alone. That's, the big question. Was this a criminal conspiracy, or was this just a lone gunman? Talked about the fact that, the John F. K. Assassination with Lee Harvey Oswald. The official, what did they call that commission? The Marshall Report, or I think it was called the Marshall Report, something like that. Their conclusion was that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, and that because he acted alone, that eliminated any possible conspiracy. Now, when Abraham Lincoln was killed, by contrast, back in 1863 or whatever year it was just after the Civil War had ended, that was a criminal conspiracy. The vice president of the United States was stabbed in his bed. Ulysses S. Grant, who had been the general in charge of all the Union forces, there was an individual who was supposed to take him out, but he chickened out at the last second. And at the end of the day, 7 or 8, I think it was 8 people, maybe even 9 people were hung for basically treason, for being involved in that conspiracy. John Wilkes Booth was being financed by the Confederacy, by remnants of the Confederacy, the Confederate States of America, the CSA. He had traveled to Montreal and gotten money ahead of the assassination attempt, and not attempt. It was an attempted and successful assassination in the case of Abraham Lincoln. Virtue Signal Side brings up Lee Harvey Oswald's famous "I'm the patsy" remark that he made to everyone. He made it to the press as he was being paraded around and being hung out to dry to be killed. And when he died, the conspiracy died with him. He couldn't point. Dead men tell no tales. Randy Kinder writes, "No, was not alone. I do not believe for a second that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. And I have serious questions as to whether this Thomas Matthew Crooks acted alone." It was someone on this station, someone watching this in the comments a few nights ago, brought up the fact that this Thomas Matthew Crooks, that his parents are mental health counselors, and that is true. And it makes you wonder. It makes you wonder the fact that he was in a BlackRock commercial, BlackRock being one of the world's biggest hedge funds. Thomas Matthew Crooks had appeared briefly as a student in a classroom during a BlackRock commercial that was filmed in his hometown, which is close to Butler, Pennsylvania. Anna Monarchy writes, "The CRA popularized the term conspiracy theorist to attempt to make people who questioned the official JFK assassination narrative look at this whole idea of conspiracy theory. Conspiracies happen. I do not run away from the term, and I do not, I know it's thrown out in a pejorative, you're wearing a tinfoil hat, you're crazy type of manner. But I don't run away from the term conspiracy theory because people conspire. Absolutely. Watergate was a conspiracy. The Iran-Contra affair was a conspiracy. Um, just because something is proven, or rather unproven, just because the proof has not come out, does not mean that there wasn't a conspiracy. And the most difficult conspiracies to prove are ones that involve the very agencies that are charged with investigating. If you believe that a conspiracy involves the FBI and the FBI is investigating the conspiracy, what are they going to find? In Canada, if you think that the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, that they are involved in a conspiracy, well, then how can you have the RCMP investigating that alleged conspiracy? It's the old question of who watches the watchers. Randy Kinder writes, and I don't know what he means, dig on BlackRock. I don't know what you mean by dig on BlackRock, but regardless, there are three basic scenarios, though, the way I see it. There are three popular takes on what happened this past Saturday. Number one, organic, that everything's exactly as it appears, that this Thomas Matthew Crooks is a young 20-year-old, apparently, reportedly, multiple sources, bullied, a loner, all the classic things we hear, and a disaffected young man, and that he was acting alone and went to the rally, apparently was acting very erratic. Apparently, reports are coming out now saying that he was confronted by security personnel on the grounds, but was able to continue going about what he wanted to do, climbing up on that roof and finally getting the shots off, and that everything was just failures, just a failure to secure that location ahead of time, failure to respond in time when people saw him on the roof saying he's army crawling up there with a gun. Failure, 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 failure. And is that possible? I can't completely dismiss that it's possible that there were all these multiple failures. So that's one, just an organic situation. Everything's exactly as it's reported. And that these were just horrible mistakes made by the Secret Service and local law enforcement. That's one take. Another take is that there were elements within the senior elements within the U.S. administration, security, and intelligence services that somehow they abetted this young man in allowing this to take place. The term green flag comes up. Just, did they know he was planning this? Years ago, it came out that not the CIA, but the National Security Agency, NSA, that in Langley, Virginia, that they have basically a computer database bigger than my house. They have a hard drive bigger than my house, so to speak. And it's called Carnivore. And it basically sweeps the entire internet, all cellular phone traffic, all computer traffic, internet traffic, everything, and uses intelligent software to identify potential threats. And the idea that someone could sneak under the radar is difficult. And so could they have identified that this Thomas Matthew Crooks was planning something of this nature somehow, and then just got out of the way, so to speak? And then the third and the craziest conspiracy theory that I've heard, and I do not believe this one for a second. I will allow a possibility that, hey, maybe it was just organic. Maybe this is just a lone nut bar kid, disaffected, bullied, et cetera, and wanted to make his mark, wanted everyone to know his name. And so he was going to take out the next president, the former and next president of the U.S. Possible. I don't completely dismiss that possibility. Two, that they got out of the way and allowed it to that senior elements within U.S. security and intelligence apparatus, that they got out of the way. I'm leaning in that direction. And then the third conspiracy theory that's floating around is that somehow this was all orchestrated, that Trump really never was injured, and that this was all orchestrated to boost Trump's popularity and to vault him without question into the White House. He wouldn't become president until February of 2025. Assuming everything goes the way people expect it to, he'll be elected in November, and then he will be the president-elect, and Biden would be the president until February, and then Trump would once again take the oath of office and would be ruling from 2025 until 2029 February. Interesting times. I'm just going to catch up on what's being said, and then I want to talk about something else, though, because the Trump assassination attempt is sucking all the oxygen out of the room completely, and there are other things happening in the world. Daniel Copeman writes that people on the scene said maybe a shooter was near a water tower. So another shooter? You see, there's so much out there, you can't keep up. Randy Kinder is writing, you need to find out who owns us or who owns US. I'm not sure whether you mean us or the US. I think you mean the US. I mean, everyone is owned. When it comes to the political sphere, everyone is owned, invariably. That's one of the big attraction to Trump for a lot of people, is that they do not believe he is owned or that he can be owned. Hey, good evening, everyone. I got 15 people watching. I got lots of people commenting. Don't be shy. If you want to just introduce yourself, say hi, tell us where you're from, say as much or as little as you want, but please engage. I always enjoy it. Virtue Signal Side writes, that kind of tech is akin to what we perceive as the capability of God. If I think Virtue is talking about this carnivore system of the National Security Agency, and it's this idea of total surveillance. And that's been around since before 9/11, this carnivore system. It's just becoming more and more normalized for us to accept the fact that we are under 24-hour surveillance. And we live in something of a surveillance state. And that's not just the United States, that's Canada, that's Western Europe, that's the entire developed world. And Virtue Signal Side continues, massive data set with AI can read our minds. Yeah, there's a company, I'm not sure where they're based. The name of the company is called Cambridge Analytics. And it came out in the mainstream press maybe 3 or 4 years ago, perhaps somewhere around there, maybe 4 or 5, that Cambridge Analytics has collected thousands of data points on every single person in the Western developed world. Anyone with a phone, anyone on the internet, anyone with any digital presence whatsoever, that they have thousands and thousands of data points on you. They know your favorite color, they know your date of birth, they know your address, they know that, but they also know your voting preferences, your favorite type of ice cream. They know everything about you. And the idea is that with our AI, that with artificial intelligence, they can push you in whatever direction they need because they know what triggers you and what interests you and how to manipulate you. Daniel Copeman writes, 1984 much? Welcome to our world. It's kind of a combination between Orwell's 1984 and Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World. We are living in the brave new world. But before I leave the whole Trump thing aside, I just wonder what would have happened had Trump been killed, had the assassination attempt been successful. Then what happens? If there was a goal going down that conspiracy rabbit hole and saying that there was an effort, call it the deep state, to use one of Trump's favorite term, if the deep state wanted Trump taken out and had somehow orchestrated to allow this Thomas Matthew Crooks to be able to do what he did, and if he had succeeded, what would have happened then? The Republican Party, who would be the nominee for the Republicans? Who? I mean, the same question is asked on the Democratic side after Joe Biden crashed and burned at at the one debate that was just had. Is, well, who replaces him? Is it going to be Michelle Obama? Is it going to be Gavin Newsom of California? Is it going to be Kamala Harris? Who can replace him and win? Well, who can replace Donald Trump? It's going to be Nikki Haley. It's going to be DeSantis down in Florida. Is it going to be Rubio? Who? Doug Christie? Who would replace him? Daniel Copeman is just writing J.D. Vance. Vance is now. I bet you a large percentage of the population, even in the United States, prior to yesterday. I think he was announced. Was that yesterday or today? I think it was yesterday. His being nominated as the vice presidential candidate or nominee. I imagine most Americans don't even know who didn't know who Vance was until he was announced as Trump's running mate. Virtue Signal side, I think he's talking about Project Bluebeam. Would these data sets be used to convince us that God has returned to Earth when the global leader is able to read our mind in real time? Goodness knows. Goodness knows. But meanwhile, while all this speculation around what would have happened if Trump had been killed, who's going to replace Joe Biden, while everyone is laser focused on the political arena, what's happening in the rest of the world? Within the last 7-8 hours in Israel, dozens of rockets were launched from Lebanon into northern Israel. Hezbollah, that's the reports I'm reading, dozens of rockets. Great time to do it when everyone's distracted and not paying attention. If the Chinese are indeed planning to take Taiwan and repatriate it back into one China, the one China policy, China regards Taiwan as still their territory, and they do not recognize Taiwan as an independent nation state. Good time to do it because everyone's focused, while everyone is watching what the right hand is doing, the left hand is not on anyone's radar. And more significantly, has anyone here heard what happened in Colorado? I now have somewhere between 15 and 20 people watching. Anyone heard what happened in Colorado just reported within the last 12 hours, just today? There have been a total now of 6 bird flu cases have been reported in human beings. And the story is that they were culling poultry farms, killing. Goodness knows, I didn't read the articles in depth. That they were culling probably tens of thousands, maybe even millions of poultry, and also reporting that the temperature was up in and around 104 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're talking 40 plus degrees Celsius, which made the wearing of PPE and forming a tight seal around the nose and mouth and eyes. It was problematic. Plus, they were doing this inside of barns, so they're reporting that the heat was probably even higher. And then they said they had large industrial fans blowing to try and cool everyone down. And lo and behold, they're saying that 6 of those individuals who were involved in this culling, euthanizing countless number of poultry, chickens, I assume, that they've contracted bird flu. And this is something I've spoken of on this channel before, kind of a prediction of mine, that I can see a mass culling, a mass euthanizing of poultry and cattle, causing food shortages, and also then them saying, well, we tried, but it didn't work. Humans are now getting infected. And then the next step is for human-to-human transmission. right now, what they're saying is that every case of human contracted bird flu, it's been from dairy cattle or from poultry. It's gone from animals to humans, but it hasn't yet gone human to human. That's kind of the next step in the supposed evolutionary chain. First, it goes from birds to birds, then it goes from birds to cattle, then it goes from birds and cattle to humans, and then it starts to go human to human. And when it starts to go human to human, that's when we can look at them potentially declaring another scam, plan, demic. I'm going to read up. Randy Kinder writes, DC, District of Columbia, is not part of the USA. It's not a state. They don't have a senator. Daniel Coleman writes, Vance, virtue signal side, CRISPR Frankenflu. He's getting into stuff that's beyond my knowledge base. CRISPR technology, it's beyond me. I'm not going to comment on it. Just I've got a rough idea of what it's about, manipulating things, but not enough. Daniel Coleman in all caps, right? Here we go again. Yeah, and I imagine that a lot of people weren't even aware of the fact, had this event not had what took place in Pennsylvania, in Butler, Pennsylvania on Saturday, had that not taken place, had Trump given his rally and gone home and then gone to the RNC, to the convention in Milwaukee, and things were all normal, I imagine this bird flu story out of Colorado would be top of the news feed. Now here's an old term, it's below the fold. That's an old term from the days when you remember when we used to have newspaper boxes and you would look into the newspaper box and you could see what was the top stories. You would have the banner, Chicago Sun-Times, New York Post, Toronto Star, whatever, Globe and Mail. And so all the stories that you could see are called above the fold. Everything on the bottom half of a broadsheet newspaper is below the fold. And so this Colorado bird flu outbreak, remember when the fourth human case of bird flu was identified, they called it, the global news was calling it an outbreak. Latest news in the bird flu outbreak, more news of the bird flu outbreak as a fourth human case is identified. Well, now, just in the state of Colorado, they're up to 6. And those are the ones that have been identified so far. And of course, we know that they're using this polymer chain reaction, PCR test, to get their positive results. They're not telling us whether these individuals are even sick. For all we know, they're 100% completely healthy and they simply have a positive test for bird flu, H1N5 or H5N1, I forget which. So Daniel Coleman, here we go again in all caps. Striking me, this is the way that they started to report on COVID or SARS-CoV-2 or the novel coronavirus back in January, February of 2020. It was very low level. It was very background. It was very below the fold. But it wasn't long before it made it to the top of the broadsheet on the headline. COVID outbreak, bird flu outbreak. But right now we're all fixating on Trump. And there are other things happening in the world. Toronto, when we talk about the potential for them to try and scare us with the environmental stuff, the city of Toronto, for those, I know like Danielle, you're in Montreal, I forget where everyone's from. I got people from BC, I've got Americans. Toronto, to the east of Toronto, a major river flows north to south and empties into Lake Ontario. It's called the Don River. And it overflowed its banks and major flooding. I used to live not far from the Don Valley. The Don River flows through the Don Valley. And anyone who's gone downtown Toronto, if you're coming from the East End, you're driving on the Don Valley Parkway. And I used to live right off the Don Valley Parkway. My balcony used to look down on the Don Valley Parkway. I used to live in a place called Thorncliffe Park. So I'm going to read on. Uh, Virtue writes, they care so much for us. They're going to save us to death. I hope I injected the right amount of sarcasm when they care so much for us. And you're right, they will save us to death. You have to be wary when the same people attempting to scare the living bejeebers out of you are also the people purporting to offer the solutions and salvation. That should send off alarm bells. If the same individuals trying to scare you are also offering the solutions, be worried. During World War II, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's famous quote, "The only thing to fear is fear itself." That's a good quote. You should be afraid of being afraid, because when you are afraid, when you're in a state of fear, that's when your capacity for critical thinking and objective reasoning goes out the window. That is the reason why a drowning person, not thinking objectively, will grab the rope attached to an anchor that's thrown to him. Here, catch this. And someone terrified will grab that rope and be pulled down to the bottom of the lake or the ocean or whatever. Fear is a cancer. And I feel sorry for Americans right now, especially I've been introduced to a new term. I think I'd heard it before, but I'm hearing it a lot more now. It didn't resonate before. Now it's resonating. Trump derangement syndrome. There's so many lies about this man. I think I've made my take on him fairly clear. I'm not a huge fan of Donald Trump. There are aspects of his personality I don't like. All I see, though, of course, is his public persona. I don't know what he's like. Never met him, and I never will. You know, 1 in a 10 million, 100 million chance that I'll ever meet Donald Trump. Don't really particularly care to. But certainly would rather meet him than Trudeau, and I've actually met Trudeau. Different story. That was back in 2015 before he became elected prime minister. I met him at a downtown Quebec City event, a place called L'Hotel, fancy name for a hotel, the Hotel. That was the name of the hotel he was at. I'm going to read what Daniel Copeman's writing. The carbon they want to reduce is us. These are all the memes that get passed around. I've spoken of it on this channel before, and I had a video taken down for it. I have a strike against my account now because of a video I put out on depopulation and for sharing my opinions on whether or not there's a depopulation agenda. I think everyone here knows my opinion. I'm going to do a video maybe next week sharing some of the channels that I watch. Share, what is influencing me. There's a guy I'm watching now, younger than me, young man from, I don't even know where he's from. His name is Rickk, Rick, and he wears a MAGA hat, and he loves Donald Trump, and he dissects the news. And then there's another one I just started watching recently. A guy goes by the name, it's got righteous in the channel name. He's an older gentleman, shaved head like me, but he has a beard flecked with gray. His beard is flecked with gray. I guess he'd probably be about my age. Black gentleman, Black American gentleman. I'm enjoying his content and his reactions to things. And another one that I've been watching, and again, I have these saved on my feed. I'm gonna do a video talking about each of them in the coming days. And it's a Dr. McMillan, and this Dr. McMillan has a channel, and he's the one who's been highlighting what he sees as storm, and this is this spike. It's got something to do with autoimmune. He's anticipating that in the months and in the year or 2 years ahead that we're going to see a storm of autoimmune type diseases where the immune system is unable to cope with COVID or bird flu or any number of things, and perhaps an explosion in things like Bell's palsy, alopecia, um, Guillain-Barré syndrome, other autoimmune conditions. Anyway, I'm going to catch up. Virtue Signal Side would hate to play Trivial Pursuit with me. I do pretty well. I have a decent memory. I have a pretty good memory, although sometimes it fails me. So TJ's here, writes, time to stock up on zinc and vitamin C. Not like I don't already do. That was something, vitamin C I was always aware of. Another one, vitamin D. Vitamin D, I learned during the COVID era, I learned so much that I didn't know. I knew that vitamin D, that you got it from the sun. And I also knew that it's typically an additive in milk, vitamin D fortified, that they add it to milk. And what came out during COVID is that Black individuals, people with black skin, higher levels of melatonin than a guy like me, that they seem to be more prone to COVID being serious and potentially deadly than light-skinned people. It came out in Sweden famously, where I think it's the Ethiopian or Sudanese community, which apparently is a significant, not large, but a significant population in Sweden. They were disproportionately represented in the hospitals. And there was speculation around the fact that often Black individuals, people with black skin, that they don't get enough vitamin D from the sun, because when you're Black from Africa, the reason, that dark skin protects an individual from that hot African sun, but they still get vitamin D because there's so much sun in the southern, in the lower latitudes. While in Sweden, much higher latitude, there they hardly get any sunlight, or they don't absorb the sunlight. They don't get the vitamin D, and vitamin D is apparently, multiple sources, incredibly important for a healthy immune system. And so if you're vitamin D deficient, so I'm just going off of what TJ wrote, zinc. And that was another one that came out famously during COVID, when Joe Rogan took his cocktail of ivermectin and some other drugs. Zinc was included. So zinc is up there, but I just wanted to add in vitamin D. Do some reading up on it, do some research, do some investigation. As far as I can tell, it's having high levels of vitamin D or at least having the proper level of vitamin D is essential towards a healthy immune system, so that when your body does come into contact with goodness knows what. I mean, we all know individuals who are prone to illness and people who seem to have superhuman ability to resist illness. I've lived in congregant group settings, in barracks type army settings, and a gastro bug goes through and people get sick. And it tears through, but some people don't get sick. Same thing in university and dormitories, especially around exam times. People are all cramming for their exams, all at heightened levels of anxiety. Their adrenaline level is likely up a bit because they're under so much stress. This is the fight response. And then after the exams are over, everyone goes, I made it. It's over. And then everyone starts getting sick. I know there are individuals who say that, viruses aren't real, but there's something out there, because, I got chickenpox. My sister got it, passed it to me, and I gave it to my younger brother. We were around before the chickenpox, this varicella vaccine. So we all got it. And it was the same symptomology among all three of us. We all broke out in spots. bit of a fever. We all got sick with the exact same symptoms, but the chickenpox virus doesn't exist. Something's out there, and it does get passed around. I'm going to read on. TJ writes, I know a few of those people. LOL, idol worship. There are tons of that. There's tons of that out there now. Don't idolize anyone. The only one worthy of worship and praise is Jesus Christ. No one of this earth. Do not look to anyone for salvation other than Christ. Voices that are pointing you in that direction, maybe lean on them a bit, but not too much, because you'll be let down, you'll be disappointed. There is only one Savior. Cryptomeria has had lots of spankings from YouTube. I've had my share. That wasn't the first video I had taken down. I've been restricted. I think the longest was a month. Hank Holiday is here, my friend from Texas. Virtue Signal Side says, you'd like salty cracker. Is that a YouTube channel? I'm not that salty, but I guess within the vernacular of the United States, I guess you could call me a cracker. Cryptomeria says, never say anything bad about the weather. And Daniel Copeman puts a word that no one knew 5 years ago. I bet you hardly anyone had ever heard of a cytokine or cytokine, or however you pronounce it, this cytokine storm thing, which is basically where the immune system goes crazy and starts attacking healthy tissue and starts attacking itself, this cytokine storm. No one had ever heard of that before. No one knew much about vitamin D. No one had heard of an ACE2 receptor, or spike proteins on the surface of a virus. We didn't know any of this stuff. It's all stuff we've just learned. And how much of it should we pay attention to, and how much of it is just trying to scare us? Difficult to say. Betty Zoom is here, who I think is from Niagara region, asks why there were no drones searching the areas. Another good question in terms of the whole Trump situation. How in today's day and age could that kid, a 20-year-old kid, get up onto a roof with a rifle, obviously with a scope? He's not using an iron sight. And apparently something about a rangefinder as well. Apparently he had a rangefinder, because you need to know the distance. You need to know the distance. That affects your aim. How did this happen? And I'm definitely decidedly leaning in the direction that this was allowed to happen. And the fact that they killed this kid, why they had apparently was shot in the throat, goes center mass. You would ideally, I would imagine, want the kid taken alive. Dead men tell no tales. I referenced it before, that scene from Godfather 2, art imitates life. When Michael Corleone had the assassination attempt on his life, Kay says, who left the curtains open? And Michael realizes, oh my God, bang, he hits the deck and the bullets ring out. And then immediately after, with his security detail, he's screaming, I want them taken alive. And the reason he wanted them taken alive is because he wanted to find out who the rats were. Where were the connections? Who was the mole within his family? If this kid had been taken alive, we might have found out some stuff. We might have found, but he's dead. And again, I'll say it again, dead men tell no tales. So good question, Betty Zoom, why there were no drones, why, and people saw him ahead of time regardless. Daniel Copeman writes that our bodies don't create vitamin D naturally, hence we use the sun and supplements. I have supplements that I try to remember to take in the winter months when there's less sunlight out and I'm spending less time outdoors. Today I was out bike riding with my little guy. So I'm getting sun now during the summertime. But during the wintertime, especially in the northern climes of Canada, higher latitudes, we don't get a lot of sun. And I try to remember to take it. I don't take any drugs. I'm on no pharmaceuticals, no medications at all. I don't even like taking Advil, although I do take the odd one here and there because I have a little bit of arthritis in my right knee that bothers me. But I try instead to take turmeric or turmeric. I think it's pronounced turmeric. And it is a spice and said to have anti-inflammatory properties. Going to catch up. Stranger in a Strange Land is here. They use vitamin D, and he gives another name for it that I can't pronounce, in rat poison. Check for yourself. Lovely. Some things I don't want to learn. I'll look into that. But, just trying to think critically about it, it may be that, vitamin D serves as like a catalyst or something that, in of itself, vitamin D doesn't do anything, but in tandem with an active ingredient in rat poison, it may, create some chemical reaction that is needed for rat poison to work. I'll read about it, but Daniel Coleman writes about chickenpox parties circa 1970s and 80s. Yeah. Parents in the 70s, 80s, before the chickenpox vaccine came out, when a kid got chickenpox, the word would go out. Oh, my kid has chickenpox. Great. Let's have a party, get all the kids together, get everyone infected. And that's what would happen. All the kids would get together. They'd play together. They would all get infected. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. They're all sick and they all get better at the same time. And in a fashion, that's vaccination. It's exposure to the virus that some people don't think exists, but something, call it whatever you want. So, I mean, to my way of thinking, something, whether it's bacterial, whether it's viral, whatever it is, something's out there because it transmits. Not necessarily to everybody, but it does get passed around, especially things like chickenpox or mononucleosis, lots of different things. Virtue Signal Signs writing yes and Rumble. Betty Zoom, yeah, hi again. Miss Christie is here, and she writes they didn't want the kid talking. I think that's what happened in the case of Lee Harvey Oswald. I think that's why Jack Ruby was able to get that close to him and put a bullet in his gut, is because Jack Ruby was carrying the bag. He was given the job of shutting up Mr. I'm just the patsy, or I'm the patsy. They needed Lee Harvey Oswald silenced. I mean, watch the movie, Oliver Stone's movie JFK. And it just, whether you want to believe kind of the thesis statement that this movie puts forward or not, there are just tons of questions that are left unanswered by that. And it's the same with 9/11. There are tons of unanswered questions about 9/11. And I'm tending to think of this incident on Saturday in Butler, Pennsylvania, in a similar fashion to 9/11, in that, Osama bin Laden and these groups, these Islamic groups, are there individuals who want to cause serious harm and damage to the United States of America? Yes. But they're incapable of doing it because U.S. military and surveillance and intelligence is just too strong. It's an iron dome. You can't get through it unless it is made to stand down. And this Thomas Matthew Crooks, who was able to climb up on the roof of that building less than 150 yards away from where Donald Trump was standing, how can that happen unless individuals, security apparatus is made to stand down? You know, I remember during 9/11 on 60 Minutes, they famously interviewed a couple FBI agents who had notified their chain of command. They'd sent it up to the senior members of the FBI, and they had said, "We've identified these individuals. They're Islamic Arab individuals, non-nationals, who are in Florida training to fly airplanes, but they're not interested in landing." And it was never followed up on. And it's almost like, if you go down that rabbit hole and you think that this was an orchestrated event, no, leave them be. They're the individuals that we are going to blame for this. So leave them be. And oh well, we dropped the ball. It was a failure, an intelligence failure, an operational failure. It was a mistake. It was an error in judgment. And we see this all the time. Saw it in the COVID era so much, when they weaponized the death of a 14-year-old kid in Alberta and blamed a kid dying of terminal stage 4 brain cancer, and they tried to call it COVID. And when they got caught, then they say, well, it was a mistake. It was an error in judgment. You know, these are, in my view, these are intentional. These things are being, anytime you hear it was a mistake, it was an error in judgment, I somewhat default to, no, it was intentional. You did it on purpose. You knew what you were doing. You just got caught. Betty Zoom writes, repeat of Trudeau sending the army after the 2 boys from BC. Don't remember that incident specifically. Daniel Copeman writes, natural immunity is way better than vaccines. Anthony Fauci said as much during an interview he did before the COVID era, where he was being interviewed by NBC, ABC, CBS, major network, mainstream legacy media, and he was being told about a colleague who had gotten the flu and should they get the flu shot. And Anthony Fauci said, if your colleague genuinely had the flu, they do not need to be vaccinated. That natural infection is the best form of vaccination. You know, and that's what the whole chickenpox party was about. It was a form of vaccination, introducing an individual to the infectious virus or whatever it is. You know, that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And chickenpox, I don't know what the mortality figures were before the vaccine came out, but every kid I ever knew, all the kids I grew up with, everyone got chickenpox. And I never heard of anyone having either serious issues with it or dying. Anyway, catching up. Even Fauci admitted, yeah, you're talking about what I would just talk about. Fauci admitted at the beginning of the pandemic, I think that was even before, I think that came out before, during a flu season. Those who got SARS in Toronto outbreak 2007 are still immune today. They did some research on that, and they found that people, and I think it wasn't 2007. It was all the way back 2003 or 4. It was like 17 years later, and people still had antibodies. There's T cell memory, long-term memory, that exists within our immune system, within God's beautiful immune system that we're all born with. You know, our Creator thought of everything. Humanity, we like to think that, you know, we can do better. Well, we can do better. Women feel sick during pregnancy. Well, we can do something about that. Thalidomide. Here's a drug for nausea. Thalidomide. That you know, because God didn't think of, you know, how horrible nausea is. Well, look what thalidomide did. Thalidomide babies, when kids were born with, instead of fully formed arms and legs, they were born basically with flippers. It was sad and disgusting. And then when the children, as they grew into adults, tried to sue the pharmaceutical industry just dragged their feet, motions of discovery and all kinds of legal maneuvering to just bleed them dry, and hoping that the kids would die before they would have to make restitution for the crime they committed on these kids. Daniel Copeman writes, my friend lost his head in a drive-by, literally, and they claimed COVID on death certificate. City of Toronto, Public Health Department, on their official Twitter account, or X account now, City of Toronto Public Health put it out there for everyone to see. I think it was in June of 2020. I had a copy of the tweet, and it's probably still out there. And they said that anyone dying with a positive COVID test, their deaths would be counted as COVID deaths, even if COVID wasn't their cause of death. So even if there was a coroner in Colorado, in a rural part of the state of Colorado, who complained over the fact that there had been a murder-suicide, a man and woman. Husband probably killed his wife and then turned the gun on himself, both dead of gunshot wounds, and she had been required by CDC direction, which was acting under the direction of World Health, that any death with COVID was put into the COVID death column. So when they published their COVID death numbers, it included murder-suicide, included people who died in car crashes, fentanyl overdoses. They just goosed the numbers. They said it was important for surveillance to know the numbers of people infected, but all it did was just feed the panic porn, which was all part of the operation to get people to divorce their critical thinking skills. And then that's what got people to believe that you could develop a safe and effective and properly tested pharmaceutical product in just a few short months instead of the normal 10 plus years. And Randy Kinder writes, think Fauci and AIDS, the whole AIDS pandemic, or whatever you want to call AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, HIV, human immunodeficiency virus. Look up similarity. Here's some look up, and I haven't looked it up for a while, but there are papers out there describing the similarities between the spike protein on HIV and the spike protein on SARS-CoV-2. And HIV, you didn't die so much. AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, meant that people became sick of flu, of lupus, of goodness knows what. Their immune system no longer worked. And this is kind of what this Dr. Now I forget, McMillan, I think his name is. I think he sounds like he's from the Caribbean. He's a black gentleman, has an accent that to me sounds maybe Jamaican, maybe St. Lucia, maybe Trinidadian. He's got a Caribbean accent, and he's done a number of interviews with this guy, Dr. Geert Vanden Bosch, who I listen to a lot, who I really pay attention to. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up now. Thank you for watching. The one thing I'll say is, with everything being focused on Donald Trump, and it's hard to turn away from because it's significant, but keep an eye on what's happening, say, in Israel or North China Sea, between China and Taiwan, and between Israel and now Lebanon, Hezbollah, and what's going on with the bird flu. And bird flu is the big one for me. That I think that's coming at us. I think in the fall. I think there's very real potential that in the fall we could see. And I wonder if, for whatever reason, I'll put a big question mark on it, do people suddenly have weakened immune systems? Are they more prone to disease now for some reason? And, that's Dr. John Campbell's channel. Look at his channel when he talks about what's happening in Western developed countries, Canada, the United States, Australia, Britain, Europe, Western Europe. Why are certain countries experiencing bigger health concerns than other places. And one differentiating factor seems to be the level of COVID shots. The levels where, there was high uptake seem to be experiencing problems that countries that were low uptake are not. So too many names to read off now. Betty, Daniel, Miss Christie, Hank Holiday, TJ, Virtue. I don't like to leave anyone out. If I did, I apologize. I think everyone here who's commented, you're all likely subscribed to the channel, but if you're not, please do. And likewise, if you think I have something reasonable to say, if you like, not necessarily this video, but if you come across a video and you go, you know what, I think some of my friends might enjoy this, you are welcome to share it out. I don't pay for any promotion or anything like that of my channel. I'm not engaging with these services that I get emails from them every now and again saying, grow your channel, give us X number of dollars, and we'll give you more hits, more likes, more followers, but that's garbage. I'm not interested. So thank you, and God bless. Hey, and I'll end it the way I've been ending it a lot lately. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. Have a great night. We'll see you all soon.